Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really fascinating, honestly kind of counterintuitive idea from Morgan Housel, the psychology of money, mindset over math. The whole premise here is that financial success, it actually has very little to do with how smart you are, and pretty much everything to do with how you behave. It's one of those rare areas where mindset totally overpowers math. And to really wrap our heads around this, we need to look at a story that completely flips our conventional assumptions about wealth and intelligence right on their head. Just look at this unbelievable contrast. On one side, we've got Ronald Reed. He was a guy who hitched a ride to high school, swept floors at JCPenney, fixed cars for 25 years, and literally chopped firewood for fun. But when he passed away in 2014, he shocked everyone. He left behind an $8 million fortune. No lottery win, no secret inheritance, just decades of patient, quiet saving and compounding. Now compare him to Richard Fiscone. This guy was a Harvard-educated MBA, a wildly successful executive at Merrill Lynch, someone who had literally every possible financial advantage you could ask for. Yet after borrowing heavily to expand his 18,000 square foot mansion, the 2008 financial crisis hit, and he lost everything. Total bankruptcy. So what does this actually tell us? Well, the crucial takeaway here is that finance is a soft skill. Think about it. There is practically no other field on earth where a rural janitor with zero formal training can absolutely crush a Harvard-trained expert. I mean, you'd never see an amateur perform a better heart transplant than a trained surgeon, right? But in investing, it happens. It proves our central point. Doing well with money isn't some hard science governed by unbreakable laws of physics. It's a soft skill, and it is deeply rooted in our human psychology. Okay, moving into Chapter 1, No One is Crazy. To figure out why we make the financial choices we do, we have to start right here with this really reassuring thought. Because no one is actually crazy. People do crazy things with money, for sure, but their decisions make perfect sense to them in the moment. Take a look at this brilliantly illustrated chart. It tracks the stock market returns you experience during your highly impressionable teens and 20s, based entirely on the dumb luck of your birth year. If you were born in 1970, that black line shows the market basically skyrocketing, going almost tenfold while you were coming of age. To you, the stock market is a wealth-generating machine. But look at the gray line. If you were born in 1950, the market literally went nowhere during those exact same formative years. You've got two equally smart groups of people walking through life with completely different views on investing, all because of when they happened to be born. And this exact same generational bias applies to inflation, too. Check this out. If you were born in 1960, you watched prices absolutely skyrocket. They almost tripled during your teens and 20s. You probably remember the panic of gas lines, right? The feeling of your paycheck stretching less and less every single week. But if you were a 1990 baby, inflation has been basically a complete non-issue for your entire life. You just cannot expect these two groups to react to financial news the exact same way. Their realities were formed in fundamentally different economic worlds. This brings us to this incredible quote from John F. Kennedy. When someone asked him what he remembered from the Great Depression, he flat out admitted he had zero firsthand emotional experience of it. His family had one of the great fortunes of the world. He basically said, "I really did not learn about the Depression until I read about it at Harvard." It just perfectly illustrates how personal history dictates your worldview. Spreadsheets and history books can model a stock market crash, sure, but they cannot simulate the visceral, terrifying feeling of looking at your kids and wondering if you've ruined their future. Experience always trumps theory. Applying this kind of empathy really shifts how we view behaviors we might normally just brush off as foolish. Let's talk about lottery tickets. The lowest income households in the US spend over $400 a year on lotto tickets. And ironically, that is the exact same amount many of them say they couldn't scrape together for an emergency. On paper, blowing your safety net on a 1 in a million chance seems totally irrational. But let's look through their unique lens for a second. When you can't afford a home or health insurance or vacation, buying a lottery ticket is literally the only time you can tangibly hold on to a dream of getting the good stuff that wealthier people just take for granted. You don't have to agree with the choice, but understanding the psychology behind it, that's absolutely crucial. Let's roll right into Chapter 2. We are all newbies. If you're sitting there feeling a little guilty right now about your own financial missteps, just take a breath. Give yourself some grace here. We judge ourselves so harshly for our money mistakes, but we completely forget that modern finance is practically a baby. Look at this chart showing the labor force participation rate for men over 65. Before World War II, the whole concept of a multi-decade relaxing retirement, it simply didn't exist. As you can see on the far left of the graph, back in the late 1800s, Well over 70% of older men were still in the labor force. The harsh reality was you worked until you died. The expectation that everyone deserves this dignified, privately funded retirement is incredibly new to human history. To put that timeline into perspective for us, the very first Social Security check was cashed in 1940. The 401k, which is literally the backbone of American retirement savings today, didn't even exist until 1978. And the Roth IRA, that was born in 1998. Think about that. Dogs were domesticated 10,000 years ago, yet we've only had a few decades to figure out these financial tools, and society expects us to be perfectly acclimated masters of them. Honestly, we are all essentially just winging it with brand new concepts. Which brings us to Chapter 3, the siblings, luck, and risk. Because we are all newbies navigating this wildly complex system, we have to look at how outcomes are really shaped. We have to acknowledge these two immense, completely uncontrollable forces that govern our outcomes, luck and risk. Let's look at Bill Gates. Yes, he is staggeringly brilliant and incredibly hardworking, no doubt. But he also had a literal 1 in a million stroke of luck. Out of roughly 303 million high school-aged kids in the world in 1968, only about 300 attended Lakeside School in Seattle. And why does that matter? It was one of the only high schools in the entire world that actually had a computer. Gates happened to be one of them. As he admits himself, if there had been no Lakeside, there would have been no Microsoft. But there's a really fascinating and honestly tragic flip side to this coin. Gates had a best friend at Lakeside named Ken Evans. By Gates' own account, Kent was the best student in the class. He was equally obsessed with computers, shared that endless ambition, and they used to scheme about being CEOs together. But Kent never graduated. He experienced a 1 in a million tragic risk when he was killed in a mountaineering accident. It's the exact same force, the same magnitude, just working in the complete opposite direction. For every Bill Gates, there is a Ken Evans who ended up on the unfortunate side of life's roulette wheel. Because luck and risk are so incredibly hard to measure, we constantly misjudge the actions of successful people. Take Cornelius Vanderbilt. He famously built his massive railroad empire by, well, completely ignoring and breaking the law. Because he was wildly successful, history praises him as this bold, scrappy visionary, right? A guy who wouldn't let outdated rules stop him. But think about how razor-thin that line is. A slight shift in luck, maybe a stricter judge, and he goes bankrupt in court. Suddenly, the entire narrative flips. He's not a visionary anymore. He's remembered as a reckless, failed criminal. We have to be really careful about who we praise and who we try to emulate, because that line between bold and foolish is almost invisible until hindsight kicks in. And that brings us to Chapter 4. The danger of never enough. This illusion of control leads to our final trap. It's the insidious inability to know when you have enough. Consider the staggering story of Rajat Gupta. Here's a guy who was orphaned as a teenager in the slums of Kolkata. Yet, he rises up to become the CEO of McKinsey, he partners with Bill Gates on philanthropy, he sits on the board of Goldman Sachs. By 2008, he had a net worth of roughly $100 million. Just to put that into perspective, a 5% return on that generates about $600 an hour every single hour of the day. But it wasn't enough. Surrounded by billionaires, Gupta felt inadequate. He desperately wanted to be in that billionaire circle. So what did he do? He threw away his legacy, his freedom, and his reputation by engaging in illegal insider trading, all just to get a little bit more. Contrast Gupta's story with this brilliant little anecdote involving Joseph Heller, the author of Catch-22. Heller was at a party hosted by a billionaire hedge fund manager. A friend turns to him and points out that the host made more money in a single day than Heller's wildly famous novel had earned in its entire history. Heller's response? Absolutely perfect. He just said, "Yes, but I have something he will never have. Enough." So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one absolutely vital question. Financial success isn't just about the math, or compounding, or perfectly avoiding risks. A huge part of it is simply knowing when to stop moving the goalpost. Because if your expectations keep rising right alongside your results, there's literally no logic in striving for more. You're going to feel exactly the same once you get there. The ultimate financial superpower is being able to proudly say you have enough. So what does this all mean for you? What is your personal definition of enough? It's a question only you can answer, but how you answer it might just determine your entire financial happiness. Think about it. Thanks for exploring the psychology of money with me today.